Dr. Sandra Dackow, thank you for being here. It's an honor. You are perhaps most known for your musical arrangements. And for our audience who might not be familiar with you, I will just read out your resume first, and then I would love for you to tell the audience and me what it is you do. So you hold 3 degrees from the Eastman School of Music, and you currently serve as the music director of Hershey Symphony and the William Patterson University Symphony Orchestra here in New Jersey. You are an Aspen Conducting Fellow, which you were awarded the Silver Medal in 2001. And you also were, you won or you conducted the competition in Kharkiv, Ukraine.
That's where I won the silver medal.
That's where you won it. Wonderful. And then you also have published over 120 works for student orchestras. And you are an author of the Alfred's Orchestra Expressions, Tempo Press Expressive Orchestra, Expressive Sight Reading, and the co-author of the MENC Complete String Guide. You have appeared as a guest conductor, clinician, adjudicator throughout the U.S. and abroad, including at Interlaken and other camps in U.S., Ireland, and Australia. You're the former president of the International Conductors Guild, and you were elected the Lowell Mason Fellow by the MENC. Did I miss anything?
MEMC goes by the name NAFME,
Okay.
National Association for Music Education.
Right.
MENC was its previous name, and no, that's great. That's super.
Right. So that is your resume, but how would you describe what it is you do? What gives you the passion to?
It's eclectic, and the reason I believe that MENC awarded me the Lowell Mason Fellowship Fellow Award was that I was trying very hard to bring together the music teaching community and the professional conducting community, which are often just separate worlds. And I felt that, if we can bring the opportunities for teachers to become better conductors, we have more students playing well on the landscape. We simply have a healthier musical environment in this country. But it comes down to giving teachers the opportunity to continue learning. No one gets enough when they're undergrad years, and I tried to make that possible. So I tried very hard to let one facet of my work inform the others and vice versa. And I think that is one reason why I've achieved success as an arranger, is because I'm studying scores all the time. I'm deconstructing them, and when it comes time to take a score to arrange it for younger, less experienced players, those skills come in handy.
So what would you describe in a nutshell? Are you an arranger, conductor, adjudicator, all those things? Is there one thing that you would say, this is who I am, this
I'm
is
a
what I do?
conductor.
Okay.
And that gives me an enormous sense of satisfaction to spend time with the score. I remember when I was younger hearing that for a conductor, opening the score was like reading a book. And I wasn't experienced enough to appreciate what that actually meant. But as I've had more years to acquire experience, I see what that means. I'm happiest when I'm deconstructing a score. Now, whether I use that to prepare performance or whether I use that to come up with a way to simplify something so that it's within the technical range of younger players or different players, it's the same process. It's flip sides of the same coin. So I call myself a conductor. I am an arranger. I was, until recently, a practicing violinist. No, that's wrong. I didn't practice that much. Not since I was younger, but I was performing a lot. I don't have really the time to do that and conduct at the same time. And I also am an educator. I really feel strongly about taking what all of us have done and condensing it into something that is useful to the next generation of teachers. You've heard expressions that say, I had a great teacher and he lives on in every note that I play. That made a very powerful impression on me, and I think those of us who teach would like to think that that's what we leave behind. We may not always hit the mark, but when we do learn that someone did remember something we taught them and have in turn turned it into their own means of generating something beautiful or something truthful or something provocative. That's how we keep this alive. I had a teacher who called it the golden chain. And I thought that was a very apt expression.
So would you say that your passion for conducting and being able to share with others drives your arranging and your adjudicating and your educational endeavors?
Yes, I think so, but they're all important. I don't do that much adjudicating, but I do teach, and teaching is important. Teaching is very fundamental to who I am. They say that you can pick out a potential music teacher usually around the age of 11 or 12. You look for the kid who's explaining something to another kid. You look for a kid who manages to put something into words better than you just did. And that tells me, okay, that student is thinking, analyzing, and also takes pleasure in clarifying. And it's a pleasure for me to be surrounded by the students at William Patterson who are becoming teachers, because I learned from them as much as they learned from me. And the enthusiasm is what keeps us all going, because there will be rough patches when everyone teaches. Just, what seem to be insurmountable obstacles sometimes. And I also recall an expression which I think is very powerful. It says, you learn the most from your most difficult students. They're the ones who are going to teach you to come up with new solutions or new insights. And instead of being frustrated by those students that we can't seem to reach, look at that as an opportunity of how we can expand our set of strategies that we can apply.
Wonderful. I can definitely relate as an educator that I learn from my students. Often I try to explain a concept and they'll say, oh, it's like this. And I think, light bulb, why didn't I think of this?
Why didn't I think of that?
Why didn't I think of it?
Exactly
This
right.
is such a brilliant, simple way to explain it. So I definitely have the similar experience. Why is it important for kids and adults to be involved in music?
Oh, goodness. The neurologist will tell you if they put a musician into, say, an MRI mode and they're making music, or they're listening to music, the entire brain lights up like a Christmas tree. Very often in other disciplines, there'll be a concentration of electrical activity in one part of the brain or the other. But with music, it's all over the place. It's in your emotional centers, as well as your analytical centers, as well as your motor. And I'm not a scientist. I can't even name them all. But to say that that's what they found out. So it's really hard to think of an activity in which you are connecting the dots in as many ways in your thinking, in your feeling, in your doing, than you are when you're engaged in music.
Wonderful. Agreed. Yes, definitely. I think making music is probably the most visceral and all-encompassing activity that I think it's very easy to get in a state of flow, where especially if you're in an orchestra and you have lots of just humans in the same place doing the same thing, I think it's magical.
It's addictive.
Yes.
When things are going well, you can sense the shared purpose in the room. You can sense the sense of triumph in the room. We don't have really good words to describe what we're feeling, but we know it's good.
Yeah, absolutely. What is your musical background? How did you get involved in music as a child? How did you continue your university studies? And just what brought you to be a conductor, an arranger, an educator, and all these things? What's your musical journey?
My dad was a musician, and my dad was an eclectic musician. He played violin, but he also played saxophone and clarinet. He was in a wedding band. He jumped boundaries very easily, and I owe him that I've been able to jump boundaries without really thinking them as walls. And I know the training for a lot of students doesn't permit them to think outside the box in quite the same way. So I was lucky there were musical instruments in the house, and I had access to experiment on them and have hands-on experiences with things in ways that other kids might not have. So I remember, in kindergarten, one of my classmates' father came in to play for us on the junkie piano in the kindergarten. But I went home after that, and I just, every day, my mother says, I can still remember it. I said, when can we get a piano? When can we get a piano? Can we get a piano? And one day in the summer, a truck pulls up in front of the house, and they bring in, through the front door, what looks like a coffee table. And I thought, that's odd. We already have a coffee table. Why do we need a coffee table? And then he said the words that would change my life. Where would you like the piano? Oh my gosh. And as soon as that piano was situated in the front porch area, I just was at it all day long, just noodling, picking things out, experimenting. I had no idea what I was doing. But I was up at 6 the next morning. It was in the summertime, just wanting to play with the colors, play with the sounds there. And I wound up taking lessons from that same teacher who played from us. And I was never very good at it. But I always could find a lot of pleasure in spending time with it. And my brothers also played. We all studied piano, and we all played band and orchestra instruments, which, my father wanted us all to be multi-instrumentalists, and it just was normal that we would do that. We'd play together, we'd harmonize, we'd sing in the car together and harmonize. So I wanted, though, after watching the what they called back then children's concerts of the North Jersey Philharmonic, I just thought, I want to be on that stage. I want to be there with Dad. I want to do what these people are doing because it looks so, and it sounds so wonderful. So when the opportunity came to choose an ensemble instrument in the fourth grade, I chose the violin. That was just, I knew that was going to happen. And again, I wasn't that distinguished at it. And I'm sure I know I had rough patches where I didn't want to practice. And I know that if I ever had to go through year 3, which was, I think, 6th grade, where we're learning how to shift and we're really, really having to coordinate things and play in tune, I kept on thinking, I could never do this again. I'm glad I got through it because I don't know if I could face this again. I'm sympathetic to a kid who's at that point when they're learning. It's very easy we lose a lot of kids right at that point. Yeah. It stops being fun. It starts being work. But there's such a payoff at the end if you can stay the course with it and get to the point where you start sounding good. And so our job is to shepherd kids through those challenges in the initial stages where it might not be that rewarding to listen to, and get them to the point where they're really now able to take pleasure in what they do.
Wonderful. Yeah, agreed. Do you have any fun memories that really defined a musical experience as a childhood? Was
lots
there any?
Of them, just lots of them.
Yeah.
I can't think of any offhand.
Okay.
I just know that no, I loved going to concerts. And when I was a kid, before I was even playing in any of the youth orchestras good enough to play, if my dad was playing in a summer park concert and we didn't have school, I could go to the rehearsals in the morning with him. And I just remember hearing one piece that sticks out in my mind was Mozart's Così fan tutte overture. And I listened to that, and I said, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. I want to be part of this. I have to be in the middle of that sound. I know I'm not the only person who's felt that way. I've heard that same sentiment expressed by some of my students and by other folks. It's just, this is a drug, and I can't get enough of it.
Yeah.
But it's a good drug.
Yes. A very productive one, absolutely. An open-ended question. What advice would you give to students or amateurs, adults that just love making music? Any general advice that you would want the audience to hear?
Yes.
Yes. Things that you see people do, maybe people get discouraged, but anything that you
never give up trying to make music. Don't let anyone discourage you. A lot of people were discouraged by teachers that had a rather black and white view of what success looked like or what the appropriate outcomes look like, and we're a lot more flexible today. So there were you remember, I can remember a time growing up, we'd hear stories about teachers saying to the students who were going to sing in the class concert, just move your mouth, just mouth the words, but don't sing. For somebody who was having trouble controlling pitch or rhythm, that's pretty awful. But I know people who were told that. And what we want to say is, don't ever give up if you want to do this. And don't let anyone tell you can't do it. Does that mean you're going to be a professional? That's not what matters. What matters is, will you take pleasure in it? Can it give you something? And even if you're older, if you're retired, take up guitar, take up ukulele, take up whatever it is you want. Go sing join a chorus. There's no reason why anybody should tell you what you're able to do or not able to do. And there's a place for you no matter where you are. We have these New Horizons bands and orchestras where people who never played before or people who played 50 years ago and quit, there's a place for them now. Yeah. And there are compassionate and enthusiastic coaches and teachers that will help bring you to the point where you can realize your best work with the tools that you've got. And people who are a part of those activities tend to be really passionate about it. It's the high point of their week. And it's also social. I mean, this is such a social thing. It doesn't have to be, we have to practice alone at times. Sometimes there's no help for that. But it's sharing this with others, I think, that we get our greatest reward.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed. For my youth orchestra, I was in the Philly Youth Orchestra, and a lot of my I don't know what to call them. They're not teammates there. I guess they're orchestra
colleagues.
Colleagues, yes. Now they're doctors and lawyers and really successful people, and they say the highlight of the week is getting together with friends and playing through quartets.
It is. We've heard people say that Woody Allen would miss the Oscars, even if he was up for an Oscar, because on Monday nights, when Oscars night used to be, he would play in a New Orleans jazz band in New York. That was he played clarinet. And nothing was going to get between him and that, weekly engagement. So I've heard others say the same thing. That's my time. That's my time where I decompress. That's my time when I heal. There are many doctors. Imagine yourself being a doctor in a trauma center and you've lost patients. That's how you self-medicate, is by going home and either playing with others or playing by yourself, but making music. You can repair some of the emotional damage of having lost a patient, for instance.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there aspects of music that you enjoy the most? Is it studying the score? Is it the prep? Is it rehearsing?
Oh, all of
Is
it.
it
All of
concerts?
it. Yeah, I love making it. I love sharing it. I love talking about it. That's a challenge, to come up with words that are the equivalent of things that are actually hard to put into words, and to be able to communicate succinctly with others so that it's not intimidating to them, that it isn't confusing. That's an art, and that's part of teaching. As teachers, we are always striving to be precise and concise. Nobody wants to see you drift around with a whole lot of words, and they're not sure that they can follow you. You want to get to the point, and that's the art of teaching as well as much of it as anything else. But as a conductor, you have to do that. Time is money. If you're in a recording studio, seconds have price tags. Minutes have high price tags. And if you're just going to be long-winded about something, if you can't collect your thoughts and express them clearly, concisely, verbally, you're not going to be very effective in that role.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any things you see musicians, whether young or adult, do that perhaps are not great for them? Like anything you see that is happening, whether it's new technology or just anything, like do you see any things that really just don't allow, students or adults to enjoy music?
Yes, a lot of things. We live in a hyper busy time, where especially students in high school, for instance, they're just busy beyond belief. And they may be told or advised that music is not the best use of their time, that they need to take another AP class instead so as to qualify for an elite university placement somewhere. And I can tell you that the elite universities are more interested in what you do and how you follow through on things like music than most people really appreciate. And a friend told me this story because she saw it herself. Two students, in the admission pile, shared this from an admissions director, 4 years of orchestra versus 3 years of orchestra, missing that final year. And the placement went to the student who had the 4 years of orchestra, not 3 years in another advanced placement course, because they were looking for someone who stayed their own course, was not a quitter. And that was very revealing to hear that the priorities are not always what we think they are. Can you make a blanket statement and say that that's true everywhere all the time? No, of course not. But that was an interesting anecdote to hear. Here's another thing. We have way too many students opting to be performance majors. We can't accommodate all of them with living wage jobs, not even remotely. And so many of them become cynical, saying, why did I do this? Why did I make all these sacrifices during the best years of my young life, and I can't even get paid to do simple things, and I can't pay the rent, and I've got to be working at other things in order to keep the musical dreams alive. Well, we make it far too easy for a student to opt a performance degree program without telling them realistically you're going to be teaching lessons and you may be performing and you may have to set up your own performance life. It's not going to come to you. I mean, I've seen that happen also with composers. They think people are going to play their music. It's hard. You have to be an entrepreneur for so much of this. Not everybody's cut out for that. So the odds of getting, say, a full-time living wage symphony job is way less than 1%. If you know, even on something with a big number like violin sections, and they're even further reduced if you get into instruments where there's more competition and fewer spots. So I think we're very free with the phrase "follow your dreams," but your dreams also have to be realistic. That's not to say don't do something because you love it, but it's like, okay, do it, but you have to have a strategy for making a living. And you cannot be in the middle of the pack at a music school that's in the middle of the pack and expect that you're going to get a living wage playing your instrument. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. What are some things that people that love music, that want to be involved in music, what other avenues can they look into as a realistic goal to, have music as their career?
There are many other things. There's music business, and that's renting instruments, arranging for instruments to be repaired, selling music, publishing music, editing music, being sales representatives for these things, being impresarios and arranging for performances, getting involved in broadcasts, whatever the newest technology is, whether it be internet-based or whether it be radio-based or television-based. There's arranging. There's arranging for all kinds of things, writing for video games, writing for sports events, writing for commercials. Those are not easy to break into, by the way. You have to know people, and you have to be really good. And you have to have a portfolio of very persuasive sound bites that represent a variety of styles before you can even get your foot in the door, and you've got to know someone. One of my friends who was working in the LA studios said, here's the rule. He said, you hang out. He said, never eat alone and always pick up the check. And eventually, what he got was what we call hack work, copying out parts, back before we had the programs which would extract music, from Finale and Sibelius. Or it might have been editing, or it might have been proofreading, very tedious proofreading. But there are ways to turn your skill into something that pays off. There are folks that but this is much more competitive than it used to be, the military option. I will serve my country with my viola. I'll serve my country by writing jazz charts for the Army Jazz Ensemble, or whatever it might be. Or even just being the person who is the music librarian for the service groups. There are opportunities there, but the one you want may not fall into your lap, and you must be willing to be flexible and to work at learning some new skill sets to go with it. But there are other things you can do. You can be a sound engineer. That's a very, very fast-growing profession, but you also have to be really good. And you've got an investment of your own into the equipment that you need.
You're a very prolific arranger. You have about 120 pieces that you have arranged, plus the books that you have worked on. What is your procedure for choosing a piece? How do you pick what to work on next? What does that process look like?
I have to imagine that it will that it will survive the process of being simplified or shortened or, in some cases, transposed. And if I can't make that work right from the beginning, there's no point in doing it because I don't want to hack it up. I mean, I have too much respect for the original pieces. I don't like to simply shorten something. I want to shorten it with meaning and make sure that there's balance in whatever structure remains. And when you're taking a very long piece, like a Tchaikovsky symphony, and you arrange, you're taking some good bits of it, still got to work as a piece.
Right.
I remember it being in a reading session once, playing a piece that sounded like it was a familiar symphony, and it was themes from, and it sounded like something put together in Frankenstein's lab, where a foot was sewn to an ear. I mean, there was no logic in the way the music unfolded. It was just a bunch of tunes. I think that's not really fair representation of what the composer has done. I owe it to that composer. I think of having a little band on that says WWMD. What would Mozart do? If Mozart had the same task, would you arrange your whatever piece it might be for this particular technical limitations in a group? What would you do? What would your choices be? And I try to imagine what would they be, what would stay and what would go. Sometimes those choices are not obvious. They're not the ones you think of first. And sometimes I've watched the work. I've tried to learn from the work of others, both in terms of what I thought they did well, and in many cases what I thought was not successful, and tried to say, okay, how can I avoid an unsuccessful outcome in my own work? But I try to pick a piece also that will have interesting material in all three registers if it's for strings, the treble, the bass, and the middle, so that it's not simply something driven just by a melody. If it's something for full orchestra, I want to make sure that everyone plays. Everyone's got to play. And I put in all of the full orchestra pieces I've done, I've added a harp part, even if there wasn't one there originally, because if there's a harp player, I want them to play. Yeah. And I'm looking for pieces that are colorful. I'd like to have percussion sections on everything. I want to make sure the low brass do something. And so those are the pieces that I've done for full orchestra. For strings, it's not as hard, but I found a lot of interesting material where I didn't expect to, like the early Haydn and Mozart symphonies sometimes have very cool lower string parts that will sustain the process of being abridged or being simplified and still give the kids a lot to sink their teeth into. Kids want to play. I remember reading in an old orchestration book, it said, fourth horn players have musical ambitions too. Don't just use them. Make sure you give them something that's going to be gratifying to play.
Right.
So I'm looking for material that will engage everyone. I'm also looking for, if I can, my preference is not to transpose something, is to keep the original key. Yes. My other preference is, if I don't have to abridge it, that's a real plus. Now, that doesn't always work. There are pieces that are long, and you think I can use some material, but I don't want it to be a stupid hack job.
Right.
If there are pieces that are missing a development section, well, the piece has no balance if that's the case. And the place I don't really want to ever put a cut would be in a coda, because a coda is when everything is ratcheting up to get across the finish line, and our emotions are in gear with that, and that's a bad place to put a cut.
Right.
Even if it's to save space on the page. I remember the publisher, one of the editors on some of the first pieces I published just said, we're a little concerned about the length. And if you remember the Mozart's response to the emperor in the movie Amadeus, he says, oh, very good. He said, but too many notes? And he looks at him straight in the eye and says, there are exactly as many notes as are required. And it's like, don't tell me to shorten something just because you want to save money.
Right.
I'm in the wrong place if that's the case.
Right.
I'll go somewhere else where the priorities are different.
Right.
And I believe that's important because I want not only the students to have a great experience playing this, something that where the interest doesn't wane after the first 2-3 weeks. I want the teacher to feel like they're being fed by this piece of music for the sometimes really long time it takes to get it to the point where it's presentable, and then they'll do the same thing 3 years later.
Right.
I don't want them so tired of it that they never want to see it again. Do you know how many times I've conducted Dance of the Tumblers? My arrangement of it? It's got to be in the thousands at this point, and I never get tired of it because, first of all, it's a great piece to begin with, and second of all, I like to think I came up with a good solution for the age group that I was targeting. It makes sense. It's fun. It works at the scale at which I reduced it, and it's like, okay, this works, and now I have a better idea how to do this the next time as well.
Right. Why arrange music in the first place? Let's, for maybe not everybody knows why, but can you describe why it's done in the first place? Why arrange something? So
yeah,
what's the purpose?
Okay, I grew up reading. Maybe you don't remember these because they're not available now, except from collectors. But I grew up reading classics illustrated comics. They were great works of literature that were reduced to comic book format. Okay, they were abridged and they were illustrated, and I couldn't get enough of them. I read all these Dickens, Mark Twain, all of these great works of literature, and they led me to want to explore the real deal. After I'd read the comic of Tom Sawyer, I think I read Tom Sawyer in the third grade. I didn't know so many of the words. I was too lazy to look many of them up, but I know that I reread that book at least 4 or 5 times. And my appetite had been whet by this shortened, easier, illustrated version. This is what I'm aiming to do with the arrangements for kids. I want to, first of all, give them a sense that they're playing in a real orchestra, that this is not music for kids, that this is real music, this is adult stuff. This is as good as it gets for what you're able to do.
Right.
And then hopefully lead them to explore further.
That's beautiful. Yes, absolutely. Is there a process for arranging? Like, do you have a checklist of 10 to-do things? Like, how do you arrange a piece? Is there a process?
I wouldn't say that there's a checklist or to-do piece. I look at it. I do it in pen, by the way. I don't do it in pencil. The only time I use pencil is if I'm starting from scratch with a piece of folk music. Many of the arrangements I did from Alfred, I had to do in pencil because I literally was composing as well as arranging, and I'm not primarily a composer. And I'd have to do a lot of revising to get it to get it refined to the point that I wanted it. But if I'm working reductive, or rather, I shouldn't say, arranging is a subtractive art. I get a piece of Mozart, and I'm thinking what goes and what stays. The more that can stay, the better. But you've got to make smart choices about don't make dumb choices. Don't keep a whole lot of ornamentation. That's not what the piece is about, especially not for the 7th grade orchestra. So I'm looking at it saying, yeah, I can reduce this. And usually I look at it and say, this will work. This will work because of X, Y, and Z. I don't have a checklist.
Okay.
I just know, I know what I'm looking. I've done enough of it that I know what I'm looking for.
Gotcha.
And every once in a while I'll come back to things that I discarded. I said, I'll give this another look. Is there a solution there that I didn't see the first time? Or the second or third time in some cases. And sometimes I've come back and found the solution.
So it sounds like arranging in a lot of ways is problem solving.
Well, I think so is composing. They're both problem solving. You're looking. Composing is pulling something out of the air. Think about it.
Yeah.
How cool is that?
Yeah.
That's like cold fusion.
Yeah.
Really, you're making something where something wasn't. You're not even using art materials.
Right.
It's more ephemeral than that, or ethereal than that, and arranging is not as glamorous as composing because you're working with, but it's better because you get to steal from the best. You really get to collaborate with the greatest minds out there. What greater pleasure could there be? Right. Nothing I ever come up with my own will rank with what I can arrange from the great masters.
Of course. Yeah.
Or less known masters for that. As long as it's a good piece of music. I've had fun with a couple of pop tunes that I did for Alfred because Warner Brothers, who had Alfred purchased the educational catalog from, had all the rights to all these tunes. So I've done Batman, and I've done Wipeout. What a fun time it was doing some of those tunes.
Right, right. One of the definitions of entrepreneurs, of business people that just create all these businesses that make all this money, is that a good entrepreneur creates value. They create something from nothing. They see opportunity, and I feel like composing and arranging is very similar, where you take something and you create value where there wasn't before.
Right. And I had a teacher once, a music ed professor, who was a great mentor for me, and he said, each of you find a gap that resonates with you, that you're bothered by the gap, and fill it. And it's going to be different for each person. So I found some gaps that I thought, I can do this. This is how I can make my contribution. It'll be different from the next person who has a different skill set and a different resonating system inside of them, what makes me happy to do. But that's mine. And I get such tremendous pleasure out of seeing kids getting excited about the same kind of music that I'm excited about. What could be better?
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely. You've mentioned working for Alfred and Orchestra Expressions and contributing to those projects. How did you get involved with that? Did they reach out to you? Do you reach out to them?
That was an interesting experience. At first, it was originally Warner Brothers.
Okay.
And Warner Brothers came, this is a long story and I'll make it very short. They were going to try to craft a totally inclusive curriculum. General music, piano class, guitar class, and orchestra, chorus, band, jazz. And everything would refer back to everything else, as opposed to being the piecemeal structure that we have today. And they recruited what they felt were complementary groups of teachers and writers that they felt could address this task and work within those interesting parameters. They parameters were limiting in many respects, but they were also they had resources to make them very exciting products. We were not finished with the curriculum when the educational division of Warner Brothers was purchased by Alfred. So some of it took a different direction at that point. But that's one time where I was recruited. Another time I was recruited was with O Magnum Mysterium, where the publisher, Pure International, reached out to me and said, this is Morton Larradson's piece. It's one of the defining pieces of our generation, and we'd like you to do a string orchestra version of it. And there's many different, there's a band version, a brass quintet, et cetera. And I was thrilled about that. I understand, I was just told actually back in Chicago in December that that particular piece is in the book, the Christmas book for the Marine Chamber Orchestra. It gets played. It's been played at the White House.
Wow.
Yes, exactly.
Wow, that's amazing. Can you share any more business details? Is like arranging and working with big publishers, is that something that you would encourage others to do? Like, is it worthwhile time-wise, monetary-wise?
Two of my former students are here, and they've been published.
Okay.
And there were two that helped this morning. And they're both now starting careers as teachers who also arrange. And they've gotten pieces published, and they're getting a lot of attention as a result of that. The business end of it, don't do this if you expect to make a lot of money. You're not going to. This is you do this for the satisfaction of doing it, and the money is a bonus. Even if you have as many pieces out as I do, it's not going to produce a living wage. The market for orchestra is just not big enough. If you hit the sweet spot that the market has, if you're a band writer or elementary chorus or classroom, you can make a good living at it, because the market is much bigger. But with orchestra, most people do it they do it because of the pleasure the work gives them.
Got it. You have been teaching, and you have students that are now professionals, adults, and very successful. Do you notice any things that have changed over the years, just as someone who has taught generations who are now in the business? Like, has anything changed drastically just through the years of being in the music education and classical business?
Well, technology certainly has changed the landscape in which we work. I don't have the technology skills that my students have. So that's a game changer in terms of up until my generation. I was still extracting parts by hand, and now that's not necessary. And you can get in there and be clever without necessarily being literate in music.
Yeah.
Think about that. That's a game changer. There are many good things, and the good things are that we're not as rigid in compartmentalizing what we do the way we might have. I went to Martha Mook's session yesterday with the multi styles, and it's good to see that we're not in any way saying that this style is better than that style. That they all have validity, especially if they all give, if any of them give you pleasure, that's valid right there as a musician. If anything, we've done our job too well. We have too many people playing well, and they love this, they want to embrace this and wrap a life around it. And the market forces will not sustain that for a lot of people unless you go into part of the profession, and there's where music education is great. We don't have a glut of teachers right now. We did when I graduated, by the way.
Really?
You couldn't find jobs as teachers. I went to grad classes locally, and there were people getting master's degrees who had not ever found employment.
Wow.
And they were doing it just to keep doing it, to keep busy at it. I've not seen a glut since those years. People have realized that this is not a high-yield profession. You do it because you love it. You don't do it because you expect it's going to make you wealthy. Also, being a teacher, just because of the way capitalism works in this country,
right.
The benefits are not what they used to be when I started.
Right.
And they're not nearly as attractive. And the resources to run good programs are harder to come by. So I'm giving you pros and cons.
Yeah.
But those are things that have changed. Symphony orchestras, there's more of them than ever. They grew rapidly. Now the catch is, can you sustain the economic model? Because there'll always be a structural deficit. You will never make in ticket sales what it costs to run the operation.
Right.
And there are board members who don't understand that. They think you need to run this as a business, and it's never going to work that way. You'll never bring in as much as you need.
Right. Yeah.
Unless the tickets are priced beyond the means for most people to afford them.
Right.
And we don't want that.
Right.
Then it becomes then you're back to Haydn and Mozart, where you need wealthy patrons instead of public concerts.
Right. Right. And when you had less opportunities for entertainment, you had bigger crowds in classical halls, where now there's so much more.
Everybody can personalize their entertainment.
Right.
And this is great. This is super. But it does impact on your opportunities to play. I used to play all the time in the summers. We'd have what were called trust fund jobs from the Musicians Union recording trust funds. In other words, when sound recordings came onto the scene, and this goes back to the 20s, 30s, they were afraid that live music would no longer be profitable, and they negotiated something that said, now that we've got sound recordings or broadcast music, that a certain small percentage of all of those pieces that were recorded or broadcast would go into a kitty, and from that kitty would come the means to stimulate live performances in places that couldn't afford them otherwise. So the trust fund concerts always had to be free, and they had to be open to the public. They couldn't ever be for a closed audience. And that's great. When I was younger, I was playing them all the time. We called them green sheet jobs because you sign on a green sheet.
Yeah.
The funding for that is slowly coming back as they're negotiating new ways to harvest some of these contributions from internet and streaming. They're starting to come back, but for a while it had evaporated, or you had to raise half the funding yourself, and the other half would come from the trust fund, or the balances would shift in various ways. It's harder now, so those things have changed. We used to be able to do a lot of playing that way. I remember one summer day I was hired to play for 10 hours.
Wow.
2.5 hours from 10 to 12:30 on a Sunday morning. Get in your car, no lunch, drive to the next rehearsal in a different place, in a different town. 2.5 hours of rehearsing for a different concert. And get in your car again, drive to the concert site, and give a concert. Then you had 2 hours off for dinner, 2.5 hours or whatever off for dinner. Then you played the second concert, different concert, 2 different programs, 4 different locations, and you did that on a Sunday. And one of my colleagues who had been the contractor said, and if there'd been a job in between from 6 to 8, we would have taken it. And he's right. We would have.
Yeah,
we would have, because everybody wanted to play as much as they could play.
Right. That's amazing. Recently in December and January, you were the conductor for the Region 2 in New Jersey orchestra, and I managed it, and I got to see you in action. You are so energetic at rehearsal, at long rehearsals, sometimes all-day rehearsals, much more so than the students. Just seeing that, where does that energy, where does your, obviously you're passionate about music, but I don't know, I was just amazed. What's your secret?
That's where it comes from. Passionate about the music and passionate about sharing it.
Gotcha. What are some of the influences that helped to shape you who you are educationally,
many of them,
musically?
Wonderful teachers. Wonderful teachers. I'm so grateful to everyone that left a piece of themselves with me. And it's funny, I had 2 outstanding teachers in high school who were not music teachers, who impacted my own personal teaching style enormously. They were both Italian. They were both Sicilian, actually, Sicilian Americans. And one of them taught Italian. But he was so much more than that. He was an artist, and he was an art enthusiast. And we had art exhibits in the classroom of Italian art, representing different periods all the time. And we were always seeing film strips on this, in addition to learning the language. And you didn't get away with anything. If you left out the accent mark, it was points off, okay? So just the insistence on detail, perfection, at the same time the broad set of cultural spin-offs. He also had an opera club after school. Try to imagine this. Try to imagine kids coming after school and looking at dittoed librettos, English and Italian, and listening to Madame Butterfly at 5 p.m. after school. Because this person, his enthusiasm for it was so contagious and so passionate, you just wanted to be in the same room with this. You figured, if it does this for him, it's got to do it for me. He's one. Another one was, and this was very powerful, she was my second-year algebra teacher. I was never very good at math, and I was not in with it was not an advanced course or anything. I was not in with the math brains. But I noticed, and nobody ever gave this teacher any pushback. Everybody was very agreeable. Everybody was doing their best work. And then I'm noticing nobody's doing badly. Nobody seems to have difficulty. I had terrible difficulty in some of my other classes, but everyone's succeeding. And everybody seems to be very happy to be there.
Wow.
And she was fun. She was up there just larger than life. A lot of my style comes from her. She would be yelling at us. We'd be, canceling out equations using karate chops, and which is what she insisted on. You get up there and cancel them that way. Well, that's so outrageous.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you really enjoyed being in that class, and nobody was failing. Nobody was even doing C work. Everyone was an A or B student. What does that tell you? It tells you that we are the variables, the teachers, not the kids. That was a powerful lesson for me. It's not the kids. Good teachers will make something good happen under the most challenging circumstances. It may not happen right away, it may not happen at the level you want, but it can happen, and nobody can make it happen except us.
As a woman conductor, have you had in the past any difficulties trying to do what you do and getting into pushback for, this is not a place for a woman. I remember my college professor, Helen Qualwasser, who was, you played with her? No way.
No, I studied with her.
You
for
studied
one
with her?
summer.
No way.
One summer. She was great.
Oh, she's amazing, yeah. But I remember Berlin Philharmonic came to play one time, and she refused to go see them because they didn't have
any women.
Didn't have any women, and she says this is not right. And that is for players, never mind conductors. So, are there any issues that you had in the past? Is it changing?
It's changing. It's changed a lot, and it continues to change. When I first started, I got some pushback. I got pushback as a teacher.
Really?
I remember I went to interview for a job, and I looked really young. I mean, they were asking me for hall passes. I was 30, and they were still asking for a hallway pass in the high schools. So I looked young, and and I remember somebody said, we need somebody who looks like a football coach to run the orchestra. You can't have this girl come in and do this. Okay, well, that wouldn't happen anymore, and that'd be against the law now. But that was prevailing sentiments, and you could express them back then. We don't hear it now. I mean, people might think it, people might act that way, but it's not acceptable to express that any longer. And we have all kinds of mechanisms in place to point you in the opposite direction and make sure that we have diversity in applicant pools for various things. I got when I went to Europe to study, they told me, I was in Czech Republic, and they said, you're the first woman who's ever conducted here. And I found that hard to believe, but I was okay. And I would get a little something perhaps in these more chauvinistic societies. But even that's changing, because they're people who are women as well as other previously underrepresented minorities,
yeah,
who are perhaps written off as just not being a match for this particular profession or field. And that's nonsense. Everybody can be anything,
yeah,
really. There are very few places, unless you play football and your body type limits what you can do, or basketball, you can still go out there and do it. You can even be a short basketball player as long as you don't expect to make your living at it.
Right.
You can still play and get a great deal of pleasure from it and make a contribution. So the same thing, it's better now. The New York Philharmonic just passed the tipping point where there are more women in the orchestra than men. Just this year. And that tells me, all you had to do is just open the door and give them a chance, and it will happen.
yeah.
So, yeah, I did get a little pushback in the beginning, and, people would make remarks, or they'd be surprised at how, we were kind of surprised that you did. It's like, why?
Right.
Why?
Right.
Right, why? But we are the product of our environments, and your expectations are shaped by what you may have seen before and other people have said, and you have to get past that. And it doesn't mean that anybody's trying to discriminate against you. It's just these things have to wear themselves out, and you have to see that there are other possibilities and that those attitudes need to be corrected.
Right. Any advice for young girls or adults, anyone that, anyone wants to do something that maybe traditionally is male-dominated, but do you have any advice for just any girls or women that want to...
But there's not that many of those things left.
Right.
There would be something that would require great physical strength, as I said, certain body type. We have women doing everything. Look at the med profession.
Yeah.
I mean, there was I think, unwritten sense that a woman doctor would, when I was growing up, we just didn't have them.
Really?
Maybe pediatrician, but not often,
Wow.
not often. And now I would say they're at a parity with the men.
Yeah. Right. That's amazing.
And as well as in the sciences, perhaps not exactly at parity, but you have all these other confounding factors, such as needing to take time off to have children.
Right.
So the stats will never really accurately reflect whether some of these changes are sticking, and perhaps they never really will. But the fact that the New York Philharmonic passed that point,
Right.
There's more women than men. That just says it's all going to be fine.
Yeah. That's amazing. I love your positive just outlook on life, and I think we need that more in the world, just more positivity, right? Last question. One of the comments you made to the kids in the orchestra I found very moving and powerful, that you mentioned Ukraine and they're going through a really tough time. And I mean, I can't even imagine what the people of Ukraine are going through right now. But you shared that, how privileged the kids are to be at this orchestra and do what they can. Can you just share your experience in Ukraine winning that competition, and also like just
okay. You have several minutes?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I applied for the Vakatan Jordania conducting competition. I'd never been to Ukraine. Ukraine, actually, for most of my lifetime, it was like not territory that was easily visited.
Right.
And we had family who had been separated where a spouse was here and a spouse was there. A child was there and a parent was there, not voluntarily necessarily. Right. And that was just the way it was with the Iron Curtain. And so as things were thawing, the Jordania competition was in 2001. That was the same year that I was an Aspen Fellow. So I received notification while I was in Aspen that I was accepted, which was a little scary because I didn't have all the scores I needed there, and I was going to come home, and I had only like a week and a half to prepare and a stack of music. So I thought, okay, but I've never been to Ukraine, and this is going to be very powerful for me because at least I'll get there. And I thought, I'll get knocked out in the first round. And then I'll just spend the rest of the time, exploring the city of Kharkiv. You've heard that. It's been in the news. It's the second largest city in the Ukraine. It's in the east. It's 50 miles from the Russian border. Right. So it's a very powerful day. The first day of the competition, I drew a high number, and that actually probably helped me. It gave me a little extra time each to prepare, because I was literally doing this on the fly. Right. A lot of the music I'd conducted before, but even reviewing all that much music, whole symphonies, and that's just very intense. And I was working by flashlight at night because there wasn't enough light in the hotel room.
Wow.
The Monday or Tuesday, we arrived on Monday. The first day of the competition, we went through everybody. I hadn't conducted yet, and I remember we were sitting in a little cafe, and there was a painting of New York Harbor with the Statue of Liberty and the World Trade Centers and the tall ships there. And I thought, how amazing is this? I'm sitting in a basement cafe in Ukraine, looking at the Twin Towers.
Yeah.
And we left the cafe, and some of our colleagues who had gone early to use the internet cafe, because this was before we had cell phones that could do any of this. You had to use an internet cafe. They're walking towards us, and they say, a plane slammed into the World Trade Center. We didn't know the import of that. We didn't get the full impact of that until several hours later, and then we spent the rest of the night in the bar of the hotel where they had the means to broadcast CNN. Wow. And I woke up in the middle of the night thinking I dreamt the whole thing, and realizing that, no, this is real. Yeah. It's not a nightmare, it's real. So I had to conduct the next day. And they closed the airspace. We didn't even know when we would be able to get back to the US. But the competition goes on. And I conducted the next day. And I couldn't believe it. At the end of the day, they announced they winnowed the field from 24 to 12. And I was one of the names they called out. And I was just like, oh my God, oh my gosh. And I was like, I really have to study now, because, next up was all of Firebird and a lot of stuff there. So again, we're in the midst of grieving and not even understanding what's happening in the world, and trying to focus on the music making. And I remember, Kharkiv is not a tourist town when we were there. There was money changing every 50 yards because people were getting money sent to them from relatives in Canada or Australia or the US, but there was no tourist business there. But I remember walking into a little store, and they had I can read enough Cyrillic. They had, newspaper headlines and would say, in 3-inch letters, New York, you know. And I pointed to the newspaper and pointed to myself to the shopkeeper, and he put his hand over his heart for us, saying, I feel what you're feeling.
Yeah.
And so 2 days later, we went through the second round, which was much more music, much longer. And I thought, well, this is it, you know. And they called out 6 names for the medal round.
Wow.
And I couldn't believe they called my name again. And I just thought, oh my gosh. Now I had to learn a piece written by an American composer for the competition. She was there, in fact.
No way.
And it's like, oh my gosh, okay. And this was all very surreal for me because they were all good conductors. And I didn't expect this to, I never expected to advance like that.
Wow.
And I remember they were talking, they were saying it's a shame because all of the Ukrainian conductors have been eliminated. And the person who organized it said, not quite. I said, not quite. There's an American here who's also of Ukrainian descent, and she's still in. And I was the only woman at that point left, too. And so we did the last day was Firebird. Last thing I did, you know, and I thought, okay, this is great. And everybody here was good.
Yeah.
And they announced the 3 of us who would be receiving medals and doing the medal concert. And again, I was just blown away.
Wow.
I didn't think I deserved it. There were people there who deserved it just as much as I did, who were eliminated.
Right.
But that's the way it goes.
Yeah.
There's some days where it goes your way and many days where it does not. There happened to be a day that went my way. And so I got a chance to conduct there. I had a chance to return a year later. I almost got detained and thrown into jail because I had bought, or jail or worse, I don't even really know, because they were yelling at me in Russian and I couldn't understand it all. Because I'm a coin collector, and I'd gone to the market and bought some old Tsar's coins, you know, just like pennies, kopecks, you know, but of course they x-ray your luggage upon leaving. You can't take antiquities out because they're trying to protect the icons, and I get that. Well, they found the coins and it's like, oh, you know, come with us, you know. It's like, oh, and the chair that was in the interrogating room, I don't want to know what they do with that chair.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. I looked at it and said, oh gosh, and I finally I kept on, you know, I kept on, you know, what'd you I tried to understand it, and I kept on saying, no ulitse. I got these on the street, you know, from at the market, on the street. These are not valuable coins. And finally, they yelled protocol or something, and I wasn't quite sure where they was coming from, and one of the guys said, $20 American. And I don't know where I had the courage to say this, but I just said, protocol? And he just went, and he waved me through. Now, I had to leave the coins behind, but I was coming back a year later, and we're going to figure out how we're going to get them back then. It was, or maybe that was the second year. I did get the coins out.
Wow.
I did get the coins out eventually. There was, you know, I tried to pick, there were initials of the czars of the 19th century, and to me, that was all a very fascinating piece of history. So, but it was, and they opened airspace the day we arrived in Vienna. We spent the night in Vienna because you couldn't fly all the way back home in one day. And they opened airspace, and we were the first people to enter the United States after airspace being shut for a week. And so I remember I made friends with a music teacher, and we didn't have enough common language to speak easily with each other, but she just wanted, she was beautiful, she was wonderful, and when I came back a year later to conduct again, she went to that concert and walked all the way back to my hotel with me. And we didn't even say that much, but we were both music teachers, and that's all that mattered.
Yeah.
That's all that mattered, and it was great. I got to visit a school, music school. I brought some music. I brought my arrangement of Capriccio Espagnol, and another Rimsky-Korsakov or another Tchaikovsky, and we played and we posed for pictures under the flag. Very powerful for me, and I think they had a good time as well because they don't get visitors from outside of the culture. So it was very humbling to be there and to say, okay, you know, somebody had once told me, they said, were you born in Ukraine? I said, no, my grandparents came here. And
Yeah.
this woman was Russian. She simply said, thank your grandparents. Wow. Okay. I'm aware of what we have. Those musicians were playing on instruments that were not as good.
Yeah.
You'd walk out of the rehearsal hall for a break and they'd turn the lights off to save electricity.
Yeah.
You were in the dark in the hallways. I keep on thinking how lucky we are, how much we take for granted in this country. And one other story. We went to a barbecue, Ukrainian barbecue.
Wow.
Yeah, and we had.
Was it
I'm so glad I had a knapsack with water bottle in it, because when we got there, the only thing they had to drink was, for about 30 people, they had a case of vodka.
Of course.
A case of vodka. And so they put the vodka on, and that's all they had to drink. And delicious meat in like chunks like this, okay? Cubes, big cubes, in bowls. And they just passed the bowls out. No silverware, nothing. And how do you eat this? And, well, yeah, that was it. You know, you take it and people are saying, can we have a knife, you know? And they said, no. Vodka and knives do not go together. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, wonderful. What would you say to people that are here in the States or, you know, Canada, that don't have to go through similar things and struggles?
Be grateful that we live in a wonderful place. Canada, the United States, Australia, we are blessed. There's much we can complain about. There are many things that are flawed that we should work towards fixing. But we are blessed. We have enough to eat. We have fuel to heat our homes. We have whatever corruption we think exists in government is not at the scale that it is in other places around the world.
Right.
And just be grateful. Take advantage of every opportunity you can. I'm always aware of this because we corresponded with relatives over there and we sent them things, and we're just aware of how very different their lives were from ours. And so to be sensitized to that. And we're just so lucky to be able to make music and not worry about a bomb dropping on the concert hall while we're playing.
Yeah. Well, Sandra, Dr. Dackow, thank you so much for making the time to be here. This has been an honor and a pleasure to share this time with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.